They say love isn't always loud. Sometimes it speaks in the way someone pours your tea, folds your laundry, or waits at the door just 5 minutes longer than necessary. For me, love was Danish. Calm, thoughtful, and dependable to a fault. We had been married 5 years, and though our life together hadn't been filled with grand adventures or children's laughter, it was peaceful, anchored in trust. Our days settled into routines: morning walks, shared breakfasts, quiet evenings with books or TV. Danish worked long hours as a financial consultant, but never failed to check in or bring home my favorite jasmine tea on his way back. I never questioned his love, even if I often felt like something was missing. Not broken, just quiet. Then Zion arrived. He was Danish's younger brother, restless, spontaneous, and freshly wounded by life. After a failed startup and a painful breakup back in Lahore, he needed a place to stay. Danish didn't hesitate. "He's family," he said, smiling at me over dinner one evening. "He just needs time to get back on his feet." I nodded. Of course, I said yes. Zion moved in with little more than a duffel bag and a defeated smile. But within days, the house felt livelier. He brought with him a strange kind of energy: music in the kitchen while I cooked, late-night jokes while Danish was still working, random compliments that felt innocent at first. He was charming in ways Danish wasn't: light-hearted, engaging, always present. While Danish talked numbers and forecasts, Zion spoke of dreams and risks. And somehow, without realizing it, I began to look forward to those conversations. A part of me hated admitting that. Still, I dismissed the thought as loneliness whispering lies. After all, Danish and I were solid. We had weathered far worse things: job losses, health scares, miscarriages. We were partners. Zion was just a temporary guest. Nothing more. But I would be lying if I said his presence didn't stir something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not desire, not yet, but attention. And I had forgotten how much I missed being seen. The shift was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I remember one evening in particular. The three of us were having dinner, and Danish was talking about an upcoming client pitch. Zion interrupted, joking about how boring numbers were, and Danish laughed it off. But when Zion turned to me and said, "You look beautiful when you smile, Bobby," Danish didn't even notice. I did. It meant nothing, didn't it? I told myself I was overthinking, that the heart sometimes plays tricks when silence lasts too long. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. And once things shift, they rarely return to where they began. Zion settled into our home as if he'd always belonged there. He was helpful, thoughtful in his own carefree way, offering to carry groceries, fixing the leaky faucet Danish had promised to repair for weeks, and always being around when I needed an extra hand. And though I tried to keep a respectful distance, our conversations grew longer, warmer, easier. One afternoon, while Danish was away at a client meeting, Zion found me in the garden, trimming the roses. He crouched beside me, brushing away a thorn that had pricked my finger. "You do so much for this house," he said, his voice quiet. "Danish is lucky." I laughed it off, but the comment lingered. He was just being kind, wasn't he? Over the next few days, his compliments became more frequent, though never inappropriate. At least, not overtly. He noticed things Danish hadn't in years: a new haircut, the color of my dress, even the way I arranged the cushions in the living room. It was subtle, but steady, like waves slowly eroding a shoreline. Then one evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Zion opened up. We were in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner. Danish was running late. Zion leaned against the counter and began talking about his past, how his startup failed, how his fiancée had left him when things got hard. "I felt like I wasn't enough," he admitted, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Everyone expects me to be like Danish. But I'm not him." The vulnerability in his voice surprised me. I found myself reaching for his hand instinctively, a small gesture of comfort. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, the air felt heavy, too heavy. I pulled away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed our conversation over and over in my mind. Was I wrong to comfort him? Or was I inviting something I wasn't ready to face? The next morning, I tried to create distance, sticking to my chores, avoiding unnecessary interaction. But Zion seemed oblivious, cheerfully chatting as if nothing had happened. Maybe he had felt nothing. Maybe it was only me battling shadows. And yet, I noticed how he lingered longer during our talks, how his eyes searched mine for more than just words. I told myself boundaries mattered, that I was Danish's wife, that this was temporary. But I also realized something deeper. My loneliness had a face now. And it wasn't Danish's. The lines between kindness and something more had begun to blur, and I was no longer sure which side I was standing on. When Danish told me he'd be traveling abroad for 2 weeks to attend a finance conference, I nodded with a supportive smile. But a knot formed in my stomach the moment he left for the airport. Zion and I were now alone under one roof. And though I trusted myself, or wanted to, I couldn't ignore the tension that had taken root between us. The first few days passed without incident. I kept busy, cleaning, cooking, organizing things that didn't need organizing. Zion offered help, but I declined. He seemed to sense the emotional wall I was rebuilding, and for a while, he respected it. Until he didn't. One rainy evening, I came downstairs to find Zion setting up a movie in the living room. "Just a comedy," he said with a grin. "You've been so tense. Thought we could laugh a little." I hesitated but eventually sat down, leaving a polite space between us on the couch. We watched in silence at first, but laughter bridged the gap. For a moment, it felt harmless, familiar, almost like old friends. But near the end of the film, as the credits rolled and the light dimmed, I felt his hand gently graze mine. I froze. He didn't speak, but the message was clear. I turned to him, and the look in his eyes terrified me. Not because it was aggressive, but because it was tender. Longing. Real. "Zion," I said, pulling my hand away. "We can't do this." He looked down, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I felt like maybe you needed someone too." His words cut deeper than he knew. I stood up, my heart pounding. "You're Danish's brother. I'm his wife. This, whatever this is, it's not love. It's confusion. Loneliness." Zion didn't argue. He just nodded, silently. But the damage had been done. The line we'd been dancing on was shattered now, and we both knew it. That night, I sat alone in my room, trembling. Not from fear, but from guilt. I hadn't done anything wrong, but I'd let it go too far. I had allowed emotional intimacy to grow unchecked, filling a void I never acknowledged before. The next morning, I told Zion he needed to find another place to stay. "It's better for everyone," I said, my voice firm. He didn't fight me. He simply replied, "I understand," and began packing. As I watched him walk out the door days later, I didn't feel relief. I felt grief for what had almost happened, for what couldn't happen, and for the quiet cracks in my marriage I could no longer ignore. Zion was gone. But the echoes of our closeness remained. And so did the truth. I had come dangerously close to betraying someone who never stopped believing in me. Danish returned a week later, exhausted but upbeat, his suitcase in one hand and duty-free chocolates in the other. He kissed my forehead and asked how things had gone. I smiled, nodded, and helped him unpack. I didn't tell him everything, not because I wanted to hide the truth, but because I hadn't yet found the words for the emotional storm I'd weathered in his absence. Zion had already left by then. Danish was surprised but not suspicious. "Did he say why?" he asked. I kept it simple. He needed space. And maybe I did too. For the first few days, the house felt heavier, quieter. Danish noticed the change in me, how I flinched when he touched my arm, how my laughter seemed delayed, rehearsed. One night, over dinner, he finally asked, "Is there something you're not telling me?" The question hung in the air like a sharp wind. I took a breath. "I've been feeling alone, Danish, for a long time, and I didn't even realize how deeply until recently." He leaned back, startled. "I thought we were okay." "I thought so too," I whispered. But I needed more than comfort. I needed connection. And I was starting to find it in the wrong place. His eyes darkened, but not with anger, with realization. Zion? I nodded, slowly. Nothing happened, but something could have. And that's what scares me. Silence wrapped around us for a long time. Then Danish reached across the table, gently holding my hand. Thank you for telling me. I know that wasn't easy. That night, we didn't talk much. But for the first time in a long while, we sat side by side in bed, shoulders touching, breathing the same quiet air. We were no longer pretending everything was fine. And that, strangely, was comforting. Over the next few weeks, Danish made small but significant changes, coming home earlier, planning weekend walks like we used to, listening more without solving everything. And I, in turn, began to forgive myself. For the silence I let grow. For the needs I had buried. For the almost mistake that had shaken me awake. Zion never reached out again. I didn't expect him to. Some chapters aren't meant to be revisited. They serve their purpose in silence. Looking back, I understand now, love isn't about perfection or constant romance. It's about choosing, over and over, the one who chooses you, even when life gets quiet, even when cracks begin to form. Zion needed help, but I needed healing. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is walk away from what tempts you to protect what truly matters.